Welcome to an introduction to art. Today we're going to explore the mysterious world of the Etruscans. Who are the Etruscans? Well, their origins are shrouded in mystery. Some scholars claim that they are descended from the Rhaetians, or hail from the area of Asia Minor. But most believe that the Etruscans are an ancient Italic culture that developed from a prehistoric civilization known as the Villanovans. By the beginning of the 7th century BCE, the Etruscans had taken hold of the central region of Italy between the Arno and Tiber rivers, and eventually settled as far north as the Po River Valley and as far south as Campania. Here, their culture flourished, as trade along the rivers and access to rare metals gave rise to great wealth, which, by the 6th century BCE, brought them into conflict with their nearest neighbor, Rome. The focus of this lecture will be Etruscan art and architecture. The art of the Etruscans can be classified into three distinct eras: the Orientalizing period from about 700 to 600 BCE, the Archaic from 600 to 480 BCE, and finally the Classical Age of the Etruscans from about 480 to 200 BCE. Etruscan art during the Orientalizing period demonstrates the influences of Eastern cultures, and as we have seen in Greek art, these include intricate designs and patterning, the depiction of animals such as lions, griffins, leopards, and composite animals like sphinxes and griffins. The Etruscans are known most for their metalwork, especially for their skill in crafting gold. Fibulae, earrings, bracelets, and other pieces of jewelry and decoration demonstrate Etruscan skill with repoussé and granulation. And here are some key terms that we'll see in today's lecture. The pyxis, this is a cylindrical box used for storage. Granulation, the process of attaching granules of precious metals to an underlying metal for jewelry. Repoussé, this is the metalworking technique we saw, for example, with the death mask of Agamemnon, in which a thin sheet of malleable metal is shaped by hammering from the reverse side to create a design in low relief. The hydrea, this is a three-handled ceramic vessel used for carrying water, where we get the word hydration from. The symposium, that Greek dining or drinking party. Bucceraware, a type of dark gray Etruscan terracotta pottery. The archaic smile. This is that really creepy smile that we see on some of the Kouros figures in Athens. Terracotta, earthenware clay that's been fired in a kiln. Acroteria, these are architectural ornaments placed on the flat base and mounted on the apex of the pediment of a building. Sarcophagus, a stone coffin often inscribed or decorated with sculpture. Now if we go to the map, you can see that the Etruscans really dominate that area just south of the Alps and north of Rome. There are a lot of cities along the coast, as we'll see, and they abut with their neighbors, the Umbrians, obviously the Romans, and the Samnites. Now take a look at the other parts of the Mediterranean. So we see Greece to the far right in orange, but if you notice, we see some orange at the tip of the boot of Italy and along Sicily. So these are Greek colonies that have been settled, and Greeks live here. And what's important to note is that these are colonies that are trading with the Etruscans, probably for metals. And if you see the kind of light lavender color signifying the Phoenicians, you can see that they also have part of Sicily and they have North Africa. So this is really a mercantile venture here in the Mediterranean, is what we'll see eventually. The Romans will want to muscle in on all this fantastic wealth that's being generated from trade. And then eventually they will move northward into Etruria, southward, and down towards Sicily to try to kick at the Phoenicians. And here's a list of some of the Etruscan cities. As you can see, there's Volterra in the far north, along with Parma. Just outside of Rome, we have Cerveteri, which is the site of a major necropolis, as is Tarquinia, Volchi, Orvieto, Perugia, Chiusi, Cortona, Arezzo, Ravenna. And then down here in the south, yes, we have evidence of Etruscans in Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Capua. And let's not forget, Etruscan artifacts have been found in and around the Forum of Rome. So Etruscans did live in Rome. First up on our list is this exquisite Villanovan pottery urn, replete with this crested helmet lid, dated to the 9th to the 8th century BCE. And as we can see, there's one handle on a side, a flaring rim, incised geometric designs of meanders, triangles, hatched fields, some swastikas, which might be symbolic of the four winds. The pottery helmet lid has similar incised decorations reminiscent of the Greek geometric. This piece, being anthropomorphized, really sort of speaks also to the kinds of helmets and armor that we might see associated with the warrior class of Villanovans at this time. Now, by about the 8th century BCE, we're definitely seeing signs of something slightly different, and we can distinguish between the Etruscans and the Villanovans. And the Etruscans also distinguish themselves from the Greeks. So here we have this Etruscan hut urn, and again, the idea is the urn contains the cremated remains of an individual ritually or symbolically deposited in this house, this model house. And in such a way, it recalls the essence of the person and their position within the social group. So this may have been a person who at least had some land and had a house. The roof is decorated with these kind of carved geometric designs. Also, we see what appear to be birds at the top, these long-necked swans, perhaps. And we really find these kinds of huts resembling what happens in the early phases of the Etruscan Lycium Iron Age, so 9th to 8th century BCE. The Greeks don't have these kinds of buildings. And while it's been hypothesized that this is created from wattle and daub, it's very clear that we don't have the same kind of modeling that we see with daub, and we don't see a thatched roof. So it's been suggested that they're possibly animal skins that are wrapped around part of this hut. And it's also possible that we have miniaturized weapons placed inside a large vase that was buried alongside of it to indicate that this was a warrior burial. With the model, it's really great for archaeologists because it tells us, gives us a snapshot of how the early Etruscans might have lived. Take a look at the top. It appears to be some sort of flue. So if there's a hearth inside of this hut, they may have had this built to allow for smoke to exit. Now let's take a look at the real tombs of the Etruscans. Most of what we have of Etruscan culture survives in their massive tumulus tombs at places like Cerveteri, a major Etruscan necropolis in central Etruria. And as you can see, they resemble a little bit like those Tholos tombs that we saw during the Mycenaean period in Greece. Here we find also dromos in some examples, so a major walkway leading up to the tumulus, and sometimes we even find benches out front, so family members might come and visit those who had gone on to the afterlife. But again, these are great sources because inside of these tombs there are these absolutely stunning wall paintings, some which have survived well and some that have not, and we'll take a look at those in the next few slides. Now, before we move any further, I wanted to introduce you to this guy. So this is a rooster bottle, an Etruscan rooster bottle dated to the 7th century BCE. And what's great about it is highly stylized, and you can also see along the belly of the vessel actual Etruscan. and you'll notice that they're using the Phoenician alphabet, as we do. Now, they're using the same letters, but clearly they're using the Etruscan language, so you would still have to translate this. It's a really amazing piece, and it also shows the kind of playfulness some of the Etruscans have with vessel and pottery making. Next, we have this human-headed cinerary urn dated from the 7th century BCE. And again, this encapsulates the idea of the anthropomorphized vessel, funerary vessel. Someone's ashes would have been stored inside. The head's highly stylized, and we see a place for earrings. Now, can we tell if this is male or female? It's still inconclusive. Most scholars would agree this is male, but this also gives us an idea of the kind of jewelry the Etruscans may have worn. It also recalls other, perhaps, vessels we've seen before in other cultures, the famous canopic jars of the Egyptians, and some of those monumental amphora that we saw from the Kerameikos area in Athens during the geometric period. One of the most impressive pieces to ever be recovered from an Etruscan tomb is this gold fibula from the Regolini Galassi tomb and also from the 7th century BCE. One of the most popular forms of jewelry for the Etruscans was the fibula, and it was used for fastening or pinning the ends of one's cloak or dress. In ancient Greece, women's dresses would have had a fibula at the shoulder to kind of clasp it, or it would have been tied off. Here we see a gold fibula decorated with 5 lions. You can see them in the upper portion of the fibula. And in the lower portion, we find rows of 50 ducks. What's the symbolism here? We're not exactly sure. The middle part is decorated with zigzag lines, and that's really the universal symbol for water. We see this in ancient Egypt. We have the hieroglyph for water, which is a wavy line. The bottom part looks at first like a pond full of ducks. So it's interesting to try to come up with a story around this fibula because we don't have any historical evidence. That's usually what scholars wind up doing. Now here's just a close-up of the upper part of that fibula, and you can see those 5 lions, and it appears that they're on an island of some sort with these kind of palmettes linking arms together, and they're surrounded maybe by a sea and then another row of palmettes. Here's a blow-up of the lower portion of that fibula, and you can see those rows of ducks, or they may just be aquatic birds. We can't really tell, but what you're looking at, if you look really closely, you look at the way the feathers are rendered, that's granulation, these tiny little pellets or spheres of metal that have been melted, right? So just like you would today in electronics, if you would melt flux with a soldering iron and it dripped into a cold bowl of water, it would solidify into a little pellet. And that's the similar kind of process that we're seeing here. So all these little spheres are then attached as decoration. Now it's time for a flash quiz. Which is a sign of Near Eastern influence? Walking lions, ducks, beading, or scrollwork? Now, if you answered A, walking lions, you would be correct. Good on you. If you recall from our lecture on Greek pottery, during the Orientalizing period, we saw lots of examples of lions and griffins. And so what we're seeing here is either the influence of Near Eastern culture on the Etruscans directly or via the Greeks, who the Etruscans are trading with. Now here is a modern kind of imagination of how the gold fibula would have appeared on the princess from whose tomb this comes. On the left you see this kind of large plate that was originally believed to be a pectoral plate, so placed over the front, but clearly in the second picture with the fibula installed over the chest and clasping her cloak around her shoulders, you couldn't put a pectoral, so the artist here has draped it over the back. It makes it a little hard to see, and I do wonder if that is, accurate in any way. But as you can see here in the second picture, the princess is wearing this amazing fibula to bring her cloak together, and this is a sign of conspicuous consumption, right? This is someone who is an elite. She has gold, it is big, it is bling, you can't mistake her. So this is a way of showing off your social status. Our next artifact is one that inspires controversy. So the famous Monteleone chariot, dated to the 6th century BCE, and in the Metropolitan's collection of Etruscan artifacts. The story goes that in 1902, a landowner who was working on his property accidentally discovered a subterranean tomb covered by a tumulus mound. His investigations revealed that they had the remains of a parade chariot, which is what you're seeing here, as well as bronze, ceramic, and iron utensils. Chariots originated in the Near East during the early 2nd millennium BCE and spread westward throughout Egypt, Cyprus, and the Greek world. And the car consisted essentially of a platform with a light barrier at the front, as you see here. On the Italian peninsula, the largest number of chariots come from Etruria and the surrounding regions. So this is another way the Etruscans can show their networking, their connections to the Greek and Near Eastern worlds. Now, none of these chariots that have been found are used for battle, and it's because they're in such good shape and there are no signs of any attacks. The Monteleone chariot belongs to a group of these parade chariots, and it would have seated probably 2 individuals, the rider and the charioteer. Now, the shape of the car, with its tall panel in front and 2 lower panels at each side, lends itself to decoration. And that's what we see here, this really expansive decoration in repose. The frieze at the axle, which you see before you, shows a scene from the life of Achilles during the Great Trojan War. His mother Thetis has gone and collected a new set of armor for him. That's his shield and helmet that she is handing to him after he lost his armor previously. And what's really interesting is if you take a look at that shield, right, we see a couple of gorgons at either end. It's really, really amazing. But it's nothing like what Homer explains Achilles' shield is. So it's interesting to see that if this really is a scene from the Iliad, the Etruscans don't have access to that ekphrasis, that famous scene describing Achilles' shield at this point. Next, we have the panel on the left, which shows a combat scene between 2 warriors, usually identified as the Greek hero Achilles and the Trojan/Ethiopian hero, the king of Ethiopia, Memnon. Now, again, we see that this must be Achilles, right? Because he has the 2 gorgons on his shield. But that's taking this all for granted that this is Achilles. This could be just an entirely different myth that we're unaware of, an Etruscan myth, and it may be unfair to just place this in the category of Homeric epic. Now, if we take a look at the right panel, we witness the famous apotheosis of Achilles, showing him ascending in a chariot drawn by winged horses. Again, this is not a scene from the Iliad, and we don't hear about the apotheosis of Achilles via winged horses. So again, we have to question whether or not this is an episode from Homer or from the epic cycle. It could just be another local hero. The idea of the winged horse we see fairly a lot in Tarquinia. So this may be just a story that we're missing. And how do we account for the individual being trampled, this young lady being trampled by the horses? So there's no mention of that in the Iliad as well. So again, with every interpretation, we have to take it with a grain of salt and re-examine with new evidence. And perhaps one day new evidence will be found. Perhaps one of the best examples of Etruscan sculpture comes from Cerveteri, this amazing sarcophagus, this terracotta sarcophagus of the Spouses, and from the 6th century BCE. The sarcophagus depicts a reclining man and woman on its lid, and the pair rest on highly stylized cushions just as they would have in an actual banquet. So the idea is that the sarcophagus represents a dining couch, and we see these kinds of dining scenes in Etruscan wall paintings, and we'll see that in just a second. Here's another example from Aqua Rosa of a couple reclining on a dining bench and being served at a banquet. And off to the left, we have an individual with an aulos, a double flute. We even have dogs attending. So it's almost like a family affair. Now, if we take a real close look at each of these figures, we'll notice that they have highly stylized hair. In each case, plaited and stylized braids hang rather stiffly at their sides, or around the sides of their neck. In the female's case, the plaits are arranged so as to hang down in front of each shoulder. The female also wears a soft cap atop her head. The male's braids, in comparison, hang neatly at the back, splayed across the upper back and shoulders. The male's beard and the hair atop of his head is quite abstract. It lacks any kind of interior detail work. And both figures have these kind of elongated proportions which seem at home during the archaic period in the Mediterranean. Now we notice in the case of the female figure, she has shoes that are pointed, and this is a characteristic unique among the Etruscans. We see it in some wall art and relief work as well. It's the feet, folks. Typically, the Etruscan feet are not rendered terribly well, and that's how you can tell the difference between a Greek and an Etruscan sculptor. Of course, one of the favorite games archaeologists and art historians like to play is, what do you think the couple is holding in their hands? It's been suggested anything from an egg or a pomegranate signifying life after death or new life, to a perfume bottle. But I rather think that the couple, if they are in a dining context, are probably going to have cups. I think the main takeaway of this statue group is that it's amazing, amazing work. If you think about it, this had to have been fired in 4 separate pieces. It's such a large terracotta sculpture that to even attempt it meant that the artist really thought very highly of his own skills. We also have an insight into the domestic interaction between the sexes in Etruscan culture. So women are treated on equal footing with their males. This would have been a shocking scene to Greeks coming in to an Etruscan dining situation where they see women reclining along with their husbands. They would have seen women and automatically assumed that they were prostitutes or hetaira. But we know that these women are most likely the spouses because we have other examples of women reclining with men and they're holding babies in their laps. So we know this, again, is a family affair in terms of dining communities. Now let's take a moment to examine Etruscan architecture. Among the earliest Etruscans, the worship of gods and goddesses did not take place necessarily in monumental temples, but outside in nature. The Etruscans created ritual spaces in groves and enclosures that were open to the sky. But then around 600 BCE, we see this change, this fundamental shift, and the beginning of monumental structures devoted to the gods. Here we have an example on the left of the Parthenon, the Temple of Athena, and on the right, a reconstruction of an Etruscan temple according to the description by the Roman writer Vitruvius. The first thing that you probably noticed is in the Parthenon, we have a peripteral temple, that is, columns that wrap all the way around. In our second example, our Etruscan example, the columns are really restricted to the front of the piece. So we have frontal axis only. And it's really this distinction that is very clearly a reflection of democracy. So in Greece, everyone has access to the Temple of Athena. In Etruria, not everyone has access to the temple and the gods. We also want to notice, of course, in the Etruscan example, there really are no figural forms in the pediment here. They're all on top of the roof, right? So we see ornamentation on the tiled roof. And we also see in the example on our right, Tuscan style columns. So we have a different order here than what we saw in Greece. And here is another reconstruction model of the famous Temple of Minerva and Apollo at Veii, dated to about 500 BCE, according again to Vitruvius. So this is the same temple we were looking at with those three rooms, so tripartite cella, four columns across the front, and as you can see, a very narrow staircase leading up. And atop the roof, right, you see the various figures, and they're probably recalling the episode of Apollo where he and Hercules are arguing over the return of the golden hind. And here is the statue of Apollo, or Apilu, as his Eastern name he's known by, from the top of the temple at Portonaccio. And this, again, is a fantastic piece because it's so large. It would have taken a sculptor a really long time to work, and, of course, to fire without it cracking requires some skill. The statue is dressed in a tunic and a short cloak, which you can kind of see billowing between his legs there from behind. He's advancing towards the left with his right arm outstretched and bent. The statue's left arm is towards the ground, and he may have been holding a bow. Together with the other statues, again, this would have decorated the roof beams of the Portonaccio temple, and the temple was dedicated to Minerva / Athena. So what we're seeing again is a different kind of form. It's a Greek fable, but we're seeing an Etruscan spin on it. The statue, along with probably one of Hercules, formed a group representing one of the labors of the Greek hero before his apotheosis. Upon closer inspection, the statue of Apollo at Veii also portrays a number of Greek and Etruscan features that we tend to see over and over and over again. To start off with, the statue is painted. Nothing in the ancient world was necessarily whitewashed like Hollywood tends to portray it. We also find the Greek archaic smile. So just like some of those Kouros figures from Athens. And if you go back and remember the spouse sarcophagus, we have the same kind of plaited hair or braided hair on this figure of Apollo that we did with the male figure on that sarcophagus. Now let us take a look at the world of the Etruscan tomb and these fantastic frescoes that line the walls of the inner chambers. First up, we have the Tomb of Diving and Fishing. In the gable of the back wall of the main chamber of this tomb is a fresco of a banquet scene. A well-dressed man and woman can be seen reclining on couches. They are surrounded by two naked cupbearers, an aulos player, a double flute player, drinking vessels, wreaths, and birds. Now just below this scene is one of a seascape replete with cliffs, boats, apotropaic eyes, fishermen with harpoons and nets, hunters with slings, and water birds and leaping dolphins. The scenes showing these activities would have served as status symbols for those interred in the tomb. The man and woman in the banquet scene are probably the husband and wife buried in the tomb. And the sea scenes not only represent the natural environment of Tarquinia's shores, but perhaps also the long journey over the sea to the afterlife. And of course, the famous diver could simply be understood in that sense as one who is leaping from this world into the world of the great beyond. Now, the analysis would not be complete if we did not recognize there is actually a niche in the back wall for some sort of cinerary urn. And now let's take a look at the famous Tomb of the Leopards. an Etruscan burial chamber so called for the confrontational leopards painted above the banquet scene in the gables. The tomb is located within the necropolis of Monte Rossi, near Tarquinia, and dates to around 480 to 450 BCE. And what we can see again is the same kind of dining party, but we also see some naked servants appearing in front of individuals laid out on the couch. And in this instance, the individuals laid out on the couch all appear to be male. So in that sense, this seems to resemble a Greek symposium or dining party. Upon further examination, you will notice that we have a distinction in skin tone. So typically, males are rendered with darker skin, indicating that they work out in the fields. But then we have a particular individual who is wearing a white shirt and perhaps a different kind of complexion. Now, one might suggest that this piece was not finished, but we have two individuals with this really kind of stark white skin tone. And in terms of theories, there doesn't seem to be one suggested as of yet. And again, in the tomb of the triclinium, we have another dining party. This one dates to the 5th century BCE in Tarquinia, and the rear of the wall of the tomb carries the main scene, and that is one of banqueters enjoying a dinner party. It's possible to draw stylistic comparisons between this painted scene and others in other tombs. But what we're really seeing here is two attendants, one male, one female, attending to the needs of the diners. And the diners are dressed in bright, sumptuous robes. Some, as you can see here, yellows and blues. And they're presumed to be servants and those seated to be of elite status. Beneath the couches, we observe a large cat as well as a large rooster. And here's just a close-up of that barbiton figure. Now, we've seen a lot of wall paintings, but one of the most impressive displays of Etruscan sculptural work, of course, is the Tomb of the Reliefs from Cerveteri, Italy. It's dated to the 3rd century BCE, and as you can see, everything you could possibly want in the afterlife is depicted on the walls and columns of this tomb. So the tomb belonged to the Mantuna family, according to inscriptions inside the chamber. And the chamber is entered through steep descending dromos. So kind of the processional, again, we see in front of beehive tombs in the Mycenaean world. The center of the room is surrounded by a raised platform, which is separated by 2 low ledges and 32 spaces to deposit the dead. And of course, carved in the walls, you can see these amazing pieces. We see some shields on the back wall. We see a couple of helmets. In the far corners, we see a pair of greaves on either end. So these are to protect the knees in war. And on the pilasters, we see falcatas, those kind of hatchet-shaped swords, probably a water pitcher. There's an axe, perhaps some rope. So again, all the accoutrements that you would need in the afterlife. And then just below the shields on the far wall, we have this really kind of interesting scene of perhaps an Etruscan deity with snaky legs. We're not exactly sure. This might be related to Typhon. But it's really clear that, at least in the Tomb of the Reliefs, there is martial prowess being displayed with the helmets and the swords. So it's very possible that this particular family wanted to communicate their service to the state as soldiers. One of the best pieces that really highlights the skill of Etruscan artisans in metalworking is the Chimera of Arezzo, dated to 400 BCE. The Chimera, as you may or may not know, is a mythical creature, a hybrid, part lion, part serpent, part goat. And the typical iconography of the Chimera myth depicts the warrior Bellerophon as he confronts the Chimera, usually on the back of a winged horse, or he rides atop or alongside of it, and he is plunging a spear into it. We see this motif on a lot of Greek vessels in and around 600 BCE. The Chimera of Arezzo represents, though, a very detailed and complex composition that was most likely meant for display and viewing in the round. You can clearly see, if you take a look at the face of the lion, that he is crying out in pain. He has been impaled probably by the spear of Bellerophon. And if you take a look at the neck of the goat, it is tilted to one side, also screaming out in pain, as is the snake. So similar to Hellenistic sculpture, the Chimera's charm here is in its form and its body language, which is used to express not only movement, but tension and a sense of fear and perhaps pain as it has been struck down. So it elicits a sense of empathy from the viewer. Now, our survey would be totally incomplete if we did not include the famous winged horse group from the Etruscan city of Tarquinia, found alongside the Ara della Regina, or the major temple of Tarquinia. In spite of the stylistic influence of classical Greek art, this is something that's uniquely Etruscan because we don't have a single winged horse, we have two. And Pegasus is usually the only horse that's shown singly as a winged horse. This could be associated with the famous chariot of Apollo, not really sure, but it does seem that it's purely decorative. We don't really see this in the Greek world, and it may be adapted to the Etruscan world. The image of the winged horses, of course, becomes the symbol and emblem of the region of Tarquinia, and we did see it, if you remember correctly, in the famous Monteleone chariot. Now, take a look at this terracotta urn from the 2nd century BCE, and of course, as we're moving through time, do recall that the Etruscans are going head-to-head with the Romans, and so a lot of the scenes that we saw before of dining in the afterlife are being replaced with ones of war. And most scholars think that this scene reflects one of the Greek hero Eketlos, a rustic man who came to the aid of the Athenians and killed many Persians during the Persian War. As you can see, he's wielding his plow against them at the Battle of Marathon. Now, it's never really been explained satisfactorily why such an obscure Greek legend was so popular in Etruria, but we also have the Roman myth of Cincinnatus, another farmer figure who lays down his sickle and hoe and goes off to war and fights bravely, but returns to his field as a farmer. And so I think the message here is, at times, it's all about service to the state. So again, using a myth like this suggests that the Etruscans and perhaps even the Romans value hard work and work in service of the state. Now, the inscription reads Aule Petruni af Cutnalisa, and this is basically a dedication to Aulus Petronius, son of Arnth Cutnalisa. So it's abbreviated, but there you go. There's a little bit of Etruscan for you to master. This next piece represents a sarcophagus from the 2nd century BCE, an Etruscan work, and it's dedicated to Janti Tlesnasa. And on first appearance, it seems really kind of Roman, right? And we hear that by this time, Etruria really has been Romanized. We're not really sure if it's one way or the other. Perhaps the Romans are being Etruscanized. What we do recognize is, though, in this example, this young woman has a veil over her head and she's lifting it away. She would usually have that veil to protect her chastity and to protect her viewers from viewing her. But of course, in the afterlife, she's not going to need that. She's reclining again, as we've seen on so many works, funerary sculptures, on probably a dining bench, and there's that pillow underneath her arm. The drapery is rendered just in an amazing amount of detail, and we get a sense that it's clinging to her body. The hairstyle that she's wearing is very, very detailed as well, and it appears that she's wearing a diadem, so another mark of high status. Our final piece is the famous bronze statue of the Roman orator Aulus Metellus, dated to the 1st century BCE. It's a hollow cast bronze statue that was recovered from Lake Trasimeno in 1566. The statue is an important example of Etruscan bronze work in the late 1st millennium BCE, and it actually really emphasizes the importance of civic life. The life-size statue depicts a draped adult male standing with his right arm outstretched. In the I'm about to speak pose, we also call this the ad locutio in Latin. The figure adopts a frontal pose with a slight contrapposto stance. Based on the inscription on the statue, though, the figure is identified as Aulus Metellus, or Aule Metelli, an Etruscan. So that's why this gets lumped under our Etruscan lecture. He's clearly a magistrate, though, and his posture seems to be that of one who's in the process of addressing the crowd. His mouth is slightly open. He wears a tunic over which is draped a toga, the formal attire of magistrates and senators. Men who have come of age will adopt the toga, of course, so it's a sign of manhood. The toga is wrapped around the body, leaving the right arm free. On his feet, though, are the high boots that were commonly worn by Roman senators. His expression and slightly open mouth make him a compelling figure, and the statue was originally erected by the community in honor of Aulus Metellus. So in conclusion, what can we really say about those mysterious Etruscans? Well, first and foremost, they were master craftsmen who excelled in the art of metalsmithing, sculpture, and they made the most of their natural environment. They drew on a lot of metals and ores, traded these with other groups in the Mediterranean, made a lot of money, and turned around and, of course, invested that in their communities. And while we can see the influence of Greek culture through trade, there are also clear signs that, through the treatment of their women, or tumulus-style burials, or frontal-style temple architecture, that they're clearly a unique culture, and one that has close associations with Rome, and one that will eventually influence Rome.